Seth Manfield up against Brian Brown Doohan. This is one feature match table with two world champions.
Back to back.
Back to back. 2015 Seth Manfield, 2016 Brian Brown Doohan, and they're going toe to toe. We are going to go ahead and kick it off with a turn one Warlord's Fury. Not a whole lot of value, but it does draw a card.
Yeah, just cantripping.
Right? Ladarian Arcanist.
Yeah, a card that has a power and toughness, helps stave off early aggression from the opponent while also occasionally helping you kick that fight with fire later on in the game.
Yeah. And Brian Brown Doohan on this blue-red deck, a little bit of a Wizards theme. We saw him get that at least the Cinderwind. Seth on more of a black-white strategy. How do you think these two decks are really going to face off against each other?
So Brian's deck is actually a fairly strong and synergistic Wizard deck. Not the best Wizard deck I've ever seen, but he does have Edelise, and he has Naban, and his Naban is very good. He has multiple copies of both Journey Mages, Gitu Journey Mage and Academy Journey Mage. So with the Naban on the battlefield, he can be bouncing 2 creatures, he can be dealing 4 damage to his opponent. I think that makes his deck pretty good here. In general, he's just got a lot of good commons and uncommons also. I'd be very happy to have Brian's deck after I was done drafting.
And we're going to fire down a Weight of Memory at this point. Not too bad for the third spell of the turn. This is going to be draw 3 and have Seth put the top 3 into the graveyard.
Yeah, a draw 3 on the 4th turn when you're not really under that much pressure. You're still at 20 life. A great place to be.
We see 3 lands go to the bin for Seth Manfield. It's going to be another attack in for 2. We just see that Mesa Unicorn getting it done. It's a 2/2 with lifelink. It's doing its job right now,
Yeah, it's reasonable.
Right. It's going to be joined by an Aven Sentry. Another one of these flyers. It is a 3/2. It's able to get in through the air. Not too certain about what kind of options Brian Brown Doohan is going to have as far as interacting with those creatures in the air, but when he's in the blue-red colors, I have to imagine that a decent bit of removal is in the wings, and we actually do see the Cloud Reader Sphinx come on down now. A phenomenal answer to that. A 3/4 that also scries 2.
Yeah, Cloud Reader Sphinx has power and toughness that matches up perfectly against a card like Aven Sentry. It also sets up the top of Brian Brown Doohan's library for the future turns. Going to make sure that he's going to develop well as this game progresses. Brian's deck is a lot more powerful than Seth's. We just got done watching Seth Manfield play a match, and his deck seems pretty underpowered just for a draft deck in this format in general.
And look at how the cards are lining up anyway. You've got the Mesa Unicorn, which is a 2/2 lining up against a 1/3. We've also got this flying 3/2 lining up against a flying 3/4. I mean, even just on its face value here in kind of the 5th turn, this is not where Seth wants to be.
No, not at all. I mean, Seth needs to be aggressive. He needs to, try to win the game quickly before the lower power level of his cards really is realized by the state of the game.
Oh, and we're going to see a cast down come down. 2-mana removal spell, eliminating that non-legendary Cloud Reader Sphinx. It's got a lot of text on it, but that was not one of them. And we're able to get a swing in, even attacking in with the Mesa Unicorn, a little bit of an interesting choice, or at least, non-intuitive to attack into a 1/3, but really it's that lifelink ability.
Yeah, he's just gaining a free pair of life if he wants to. The one thing Seth does have going for him is that he has some good removal spells, some good, inexpensive removal spells, and that could give him the edge he needs to fight through.
And Naban into Academy Journey Mage. This is a phenomenal turn. Naban says that whenever one of these wizards enters the battlefield and has an ability trigger, you get to trigger it twice. Academy Journey Mage bounces a creature that your opponent controls. 2 of those triggers sweeps Seth Manfield's entire battlefield.
Yeah, so Brian Brown Doohan there. That Academy Journey Mage just got 6 mana worth of permanence off the battlefield on Seth's side. Just a huge tempo swing there for Brian Brown Doohan. Going to put him in a dominating position here.
And we're going to lose the Arcanist as the Eldest Reborn comes down to the battlefield. Brian, he's got quite a few cards in hand. He may not be too worried about that discard clause. And then that is going to have its 3rd saga as well to bring back one of these creatures back from the graveyard. Right now, might be eyeing that Cloud Reader Sphinx.
Yeah, now Brian, he really wants to apply a lot of pressure here. Seth is at 25. He is at 15. It may lead people to believe that, perhaps you should be, playing a more controlling game. You have drawn more cards. With that Eldest Reborn on the battlefield, though, Seth with no permanence on the battlefield, Brian really wants to press the issue as much as possible right now. So he wants to put as much damage on the board as he can this turn, and that's my opinion anyway.
I mean, it seems like a reasonable one. We're going to see 5 mana here from Brian Braun-Duin. He does got quite a bit of damage, and actually it's going to be joined by a Skizik.
Yeah,
more of this damage coming down. A huge hasty creature, really.
That is exactly what I would have wanted to have in that spot.
1 mana left open at the moment, but really this is just an absolute crushing turn. You were talking about how Seth Manfield was all the way up at 25, already finds himself back down to 15 after that hit, and if Seth doesn't really apply pressure to the battlefield this turn, it's going to be another hit for 10. He's going to find himself down to 5. Brian Braun-Duin needs to discard a card this turn, but I'm not certain how effective that's going to be for really stopping him. It's a Radiating Lightning.
Yeah, and Brian Braun-Duin, that Radiating Lightning can be a reasonable card. We saw it be very powerful against his last opponent. We know that it's going to be strong against the Saprolings or the Siege Commander tokens that he might play against in future rounds also.
And 2 old friends rejoining the battlefield, the Aven Sentry and the Mesa Unicorn. They were earlier returned to the hand by that Academy Journey Mage, making their way back to the battlefield now.
Yeah, Brian still has some nice attacks here. Well, the next turn, Seth will get a 3rd chapter of the Eldest Reborn.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, looks like Cloud Reader Sphinx is the card you'd want most.
That is going to be an interesting decision, because I wonder if there's any situation where maybe Brian Braun-Duin or Seth Manfield are able to cast a removal spell and really get something that's a little bit more idealistic. I don't really think that any of the creatures on Seth's side of the battlefield are ones that are more valuable than the Cloud Reader Sphinx, though.
Yeah, and I think that Cloud Reader Sphinx, really, of all the creatures that have been played so far this game, is the target that he wants the most.
And there is the Gitu Journey Mage. That's going to come in. He does control another wizard. And remember that there is the Naban, which means that we're going to get 2 triggers of that ability, which means that that's actually 4 damage just for entering the battlefield. Then it's another one of these swings for 10. We're going to throw a blocker in the way of this. It gains 2 life, but otherwise it's still a substantial swing for 7 for a total damage of 5. Seth finds himself at 6.
Yeah, and we know, Seth does not, that Brian has more copies of Gitu Journey Mage in his deck.
How many?
So he just has 2.
Okay.
But he does have quite a bit of reach. A lot of it's already been played this game. He has the Wizard's Lightning, the Radiating Lightning. He has the Journey Mages. Skizik can act as reach in a lot of situations. Right now, Brian, he has 3 bodies on the board. So while Seth is going to get that Cloud Reader Sphinx back, or the Journey Mage back right now, depending on what he thinks is going to be better, and then he gets to play another creature, that means that Seth could stabilize this turn, but this is really a key turn. Because if Brian has a way to clear blockers on the following turn, or has a way to interact with Seth's play this turn, then the game is likely going to end in the next turn cycle.
All right. Well, Seth, taking a look, running through all the options, we do see him currently contemplating what this 3rd saga is going to be. He's going to go for the Mesa Unicorn. Not what I expected.
Not what I expected either. I think this leads me to believe that he has at least 1 copy of Adamant Will.
Okay. The Adamant Will would give it +2/+2. It would also give it indestructible until end of turn. It would allow it to actually trade with some of these creatures as well as gain a pretty substantial amount of life. We do still have 6 mana available for Seth Manfield. He didn't actually apply anything to the battlefield that turn. So as we're heading into Brian Braun-Duin's turn, my eyes are kind of on to see what Seth is actually going to do, because as it sits, I don't think this board is quite enough.
Yeah, now Brian has a pretty obvious play of turn my creature sideways on board. I am presenting lethal. However, with Seth Manfield sitting on the other side of the table, or I guess it's not lethal, because if Seth just blocks the Gitu Journey Mage, he would go to 1.
Yep.
And
we're going to see kind of a conservative attack here. It's just going to be the Skizik. 5 damage coming in, and Blessed Light is going to take it down. Exile target creature or enchantment. 5 mana. Instant eliminates that one from contention, and we're going to have a Keldon Raider join the battlefield. So it is now a Mesa Unicorn once again facing off against this field of a 4-3, a 2-1, 3-2.
In this Mesa Unicorn, the lifelink on there, it scared off Brian from an attack last turn, and Seth's got to be happy about that.
Yeah, that definitely wasn't the creature that we expected, but when you've got 2 world champions on the battlefield, I'm going to go ahead and defer to them myself.
Absolutely. I think that was absolutely the right play in hindsight, and Seth able to see those situations where it's better to have that, underwhelming 2-drop than it is to have that very powerful 5-drop on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm. So 2 planes, 4 swamps currently available. We do still have this Mesa Unicorn. We're facing down a board of 3 creatures. Brian's starting to run a little bit light on these cards in hand, where I think Seth is actually still up in the cards in hand. He did having 2 of them return to his hand, redeploying them at one point, gave him the opportunity to keep a relatively hard card count in hand. a Drudge Sentinel coming down to the battlefield. We saw him draft that card. Certainly an interesting one.
Yeah, now, also worth noting, Brian chose not to rummage on the previous turn.
Mm-hmm.
That means that at least 2 of his cards are very good here.
Yeah, the rummage as opposed to the loot ability. There's always that idea of, well, if you have any card in your hand, you always loot, because you can always discard the worst card.
Let's not get into this conversation right now.
Naturally. The rummage ability avoids it entirely because you have to discard first. And so we saw Brian Brown do an elect not to do so, really a sign that whatever cards were in his hand at the time were valuable enough to him. And it's going to be an Academy Drake coming down to the battlefield, flying 4-4. And actually just a pass back of the turn. Doesn't really like how these attacks look. The Drudge Sentinel, not really going to be dying on any of these attacks that are coming in.
Yeah, I mean, Brian could have essentially traded his Raider there for the Mesa Unicorn if he had wanted to.
Mm-hmm. A 4-mana 4-3 for a 2-mana 2-2 with lifelink. Something that Brian Brown doing is not interested in. We're actually going to get aggressive with the Unicorn. No blocks whatsoever. Has decided that that's just not really worth his time. And Seth's going to keep on going with his turn. He's got to have something else then in this case.
Yeah, I feel like Seth just has some magical ability to get people to play his game in a lot of ways. Because if people just turned all of their creatures sideways without thinking about it against him consistently, I feel like they might have better success than his current set of opponents. Brian, I think, is playing this game well. I'm not taking anything away from it, but
we saw a Mesa Unicorn attack into a 4-4 and a 4-3, and then it's followed up by a Cabal Evangel. It's definitely something to where he's at least getting Brian Brown doing into a position of respecting what could potentially be in hand.
Yes.
There is still the flyer on the battlefield, which means that there are just a couple of swings that would need to get in that could close this game out relatively quickly. You also do have that G2 Journey Mage, which against the Drudge Sentinel, against the Cabal Evangel, it, I guess, sort of trades. I guess it wouldn't trade with the Drudge Sentinel.
Yeah, so the thing is, again, Brian has a situation here where if Seth doesn't have anything in hand that interacts, Brian could just turn all of his creatures sideways and feel pretty good about where things line up.
Mm-hmm.
If he has a piece of interaction, it's a pretty easy win here.
There is the Academy Journey Mage we just talked about. That Nabondine of Iteration is going to allow that to double up on its ability. Both of those creatures going back to the hand, and there is a massive swing in here from Brian Brown to its side. That's going to take game 1. Seth Manfield, Drudge Sentinels, Mesa Unicorns, Aven Sentries, not able to get it done against Nabon, the Deed of Iteration, and what appears to be the rest of his class.
Yeah, so Brian, in that game, cast Nabon, and then over the course of the game, on 2 different occasions, was able to cast an Academy Journey Mage, adding a 3-2 to the battlefield while also bouncing 6 or more mana worth of permanents back to Seth's hand. Not only that, but Brian's cards just, at a mean level, were more powerful than Seth's the whole way up the chain. So Brian's got to feel really good about his chances here, especially after seeing cards like Drudge Sentinel and Cabal Evangel out of the number 1 ranked player in the world here, Seth Manfield.
Yeah, and heading into the
I
sideboard,
believe he's the number 2 ranked player in the world.
he is the number 2 ranked player at the moment.
Respect to the other color commentator here this week.
I mean, Reed's in the booth. He doesn't entirely apply this weekend.
yeah.
Top ranked player in the battlefield.
Yes,
All
that's
right.
fair. That's fair.
So for the sideboarding, you have been playing limited at a pretty high level before. To what effect does sideboarding really start to take effect? Because at least from my aspect, a lot of what I'll see is actually the sideboard really not have too much of an effect in these limited games. And when I see these really high level drafters, it seems like the sideboard really takes on a whole new meaning for them.
Yeah, so I think sideboarding is very important in Limited, more so in Sealed than in Draft, because in Draft you're unlikely to have in excess of playable cards that are on color. So there might be, a few sideboard considerations, but some things that you might want to try out if you're new to drafting and you're trying to, incorporate sideboarding into your game 2 and 3 plan. It might be that if you see your opponent playing a lot of 2/2s, perhaps it might be wise for you to sideboard in a card like Tolarian Scholar, which on its surface could seem quite weak as a 2/3 for 3 mana, but if your opponent has a whole bunch of 2/1s and 2/2s, then that card suddenly becomes quite powerful. Other things that come up are if you see, an opponent who plays multiple artifacts and or enchantments, you want to bring in disenchant effects. That's a little more of an obvious inclusion there. And then you may actually want to change your curve depending on, the aggressive or controlling plan of your opponent's deck.
Yeah, and that's actually something interesting that you point out about really recognizing the spread of power and toughness that your opponent has and how their game plan is coming together.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the time, if you're playing against somebody who is trying to, create large life linkers, you might want to side in something like that gives you the ability to sacrifice creatures turn after turn. That way you can sacrifice a creature, prevent your opponent from gaining that life, and, take away their racing plan, if you will.
So maybe the Soothsayer that didn't quite make the cut the first time finds its way into into
things
the main
like
deck.
that.
Okay. Well, it looks like these players are just about getting ready to head into their game 2. We saw Brian Braun-Duin come with a pretty commanding game 1, just right from the beginning. The cards that he were playing, like you said, were just better.
Yep.
So from Seth Manfield's side of the battlefield, we know that he's got a couple of these powerful cards. We saw him at the drafting portion of this. He's got, he's got the Serra Angel. He's got a pretty substantial removal suite as well. Where do you think his game plan is really going to lie when you're sitting with a deck that has probably a lower quality overall? What strategies can you take to really try and address that issue?
So when you have a worse deck, a lot of the time you want to try to win quickly to overwhelm your opponent. But, against Brian's deck, that's going to be really hard to do because Brian's deck is so tempo-oriented. In the same way, Seth is going to be struggling to play a longer game to take advantage of his cards like Eldest Reborn because, his long game against Brian's deck is much more powerful and has cards like Weight of Memory that he saw in the first game. So Seth, I think, is just probably hoping he gets lucky here.
Okay.
I think that is his best strategy against a deck like Brian's.
It's the best way to walk into 7-0, right?
It absolutely is. Worth noting that, I just talked about how sideboards don't come into play in Draft as often as they do in Sealed, but Brian Braun-Duin has a very nice sideboard here. 2 copies of Deep Freeze that were going around on the table. He has 2 of them, and neither of them are in the main deck. And I think that might surprise a lot of people who have played this format. They might have thought that Deep Freeze was a quality pick, a removal spell, if you will. But Brian, recognizing what his deck wants to do, doesn't want to give his opponent free chump blockers, saw multiple powerful legendary sorceries going around the table. Those are not cards that he wants to allow himself to get beaten by. He wants to be playing real removal spells, threats, and card draw. And I think that you could learn a lot from seeing the way he constructed his deck.
Yeah, and Brian, his pack one, pick one was that Academy Journey Mage was not feeling that confident. He does not feel like it's actually... He feels it's a bit overrated. Follows it up right away with a pick 2, Adeliz the Cinderwind. Immediately, he starts just cruising. So it's the Vidalian Arcanist coming down. This is going to be a little bit of a mana accelerant. It's got a stipulation. You do have to use that on instants or sorceries, and it's going to be an opt here from Brian Browndoin. From Seth Manfield's side, not a whole lot of development yet. We did not get to see anything in the realm of, the Macy Unicorn or any of those other 2-mana spells that he has got access to. So it is just going to be a swing in for 1, and there's going to be actually the Dominant Trapper coming down. It's a 3/2. If Seth casts any of those historic spells, it's going to be able to tap down some of those opposing creatures. As far as getting that aggressive game plan that you were describing, this might be a good step in the right direction to make sure that there can't be any sort of brick walls in the way.
Absolutely, and here, Brian playing a card draw spell here, not advancing his board state. If Seth does want to try to steal this game with aggression, this is what he wants to be seeing.
Weight of Memory, draw 3, mill 3. We see a Plains of Vicious Offering and a Gideon's Reproach. About half the removal in this deck just immediately hit the bin.
Yeah, I mean, you get 3 random cards. Sometimes they're pretty good. Hitting the Offering and the Reproach, both pretty nice there. Of course, Seth would much rather draw threats than removal spells here. Like, if he had drawn that Confessor instead of drawing a Reproach that turn, and he did not have a threat to play, then he would have rather had drawn that Confessor on that turn.
That's true, and that is going to be a 3/3 menace on the battlefield, which means that it does require 2 creatures to get in the way of it. This is going to make combat get a little bit tricky, especially paired with this Dominant Trapper. Or an Academy Journey Mage is going to come down and just kick it back to the hand. We do see that cost only 4 mana. It's a 5-mana spell, but it costs 1 less if you control another wizard.
And that mana reduction could be relevant here if Brian has Wizard's Lightning in hand.
I believe he also got a Shivan Fire as his 3rd pick, and immediately decided that he had made the right call with his pack one pick one. So it's a Journey Mage up against a Trapper. Not exactly where you want to be on Seth Manfield's side. They both, trade with each other. They're both 3/2s.
Yeah, Brian, I imagine he would be happy to trade here, even though his deck is usually not in the market for trades. Having played a Weight of Memory means that he's up in terms of cards. He's the one with the threat on the battlefield.
And that's what we're going to see play out. Brian throws that creature in front of it, and Seth going to be putting his Dominant Trapper to the graveyard. No pressure left. It's just the Arcanist that is holding down the fort. 4 mana for Seth. Really curious about what kind of plays he might be looking to make. It's a Macy Unicorn here, and it's another 3-mana play. Is this going to be the Drudge Sentinel? All right, these are the mainstays. We saw them last game. We're going to see them this game. This is kind of Seth's crew. You know?
I mean, these guys beat Siege Gang Commander. I don't know what you're talking about. these are
They're battle proven. You know?
Yeah. They've tested.
They've leveled up. So it's another 5-minute play. It's a Cloud Reader Sphinx. This is going to get that Scry too. Brian going to be keeping an eye on the top of his library, trying to set it up. I think I saw an island among that. That's going to be going to the bottom. He's decided his mana has done just about all it needs to.
Yeah, and I believe there was also a Wizard's Lightning there on top. So.
Oh, and the Wizard's Lightning is going to actually be a pretty nice answer to really either the Macy Unicorn or anything else. Could also end up going towards the face.
Yeah.
Cast down on the Wind Reader Sphinx. It's almost playing out kind of like a script. The last Wind Reader Sphinx that we saw also got cast down. Give it to these players. Part of the reason why they're champions is because they're so consistent. Dominant Trapper hitting the battlefield. And there it is. The Shivan Fire is going to eliminate that card from the battlefield. It's just the Drudge Sentinel that stands in the way. The Macy Unicorn already having gone to battle. And it's an Academy Drake. 7 mana for a 4/4 in the air. When the life totals are at this point, both of them really relatively high, having the biggest creature in the air has got to feel pretty good.
Absolutely. I think, Academy Drake, just a great common of Dominaria. Card that, as a 2/2 flyer for 3 is kind of, baseline a good playable card that's going to make your deck the majority of the time, but the fact that later on in the game it just becomes this 4/4 flying body, just absolutely tremendous card.
We do see it answered by that Blessed Light, so it is going to be exiled, and we continue to see what we saw in the last game, that Mace Unicorn attacking on in into a 1/3 blocker, but it means that Seth's up to 22 every time that he does this. It just buys him a little bit more time. And there it is, the Gitu Journey Mage not able to get that double trigger this time, but it is still going to be 2 damage. It's going to be a 3/2 on the battlefield. It does mean that he could trade this for the Mace Unicorn if he does decide to. 3 mana for a 2/2 lifelink. Ooh. Is this a divest? I like it. Take a look, try and grab a creature or an artifact, and we see Blink of an Eye and Wizard's Lightning. Did not really go the way we were hoping to, I think.
Yeah, I think it might be wise for us to divest from when it comes to limited. And this is one of the problems with it. A card like Divest on its surface may seem like, oh, I can take the best creature out of my opponent's hand. But when you're playing a longer game of limited, a lot of the time you get to this stage of the game where both players have played out the majority of their hand. And this is the type of card that when you draw it in the mid to late game, a decent portion of the time when you cast it, your opponent wouldn't even have a target in their hand. So card I really don't like playing in limited, but if my opponent has a lot of bombs, I might be sideboarding it in, especially if my deck is more aggressive and I'm looking to end the game quickly.
And we do see that trade happen. The Mace Unicorn attacks in, and Brian Braun-Duin happy to make another trade. He throws that 3/2 in front of it. It's already done what it needs to. So it's the Drudge Sentinel, and it's another one of these Stronghold Confessors. It is a 3/3 with Menace, so it cannot currently be blocked, and right now we are sitting with a 5-point. Wizard's Lightning takes it down. Never mind. Ignore all that.
And though Brian is mostly out of gas here, we know he has that Blink of an Eye, and that's going to draw him a card and deal with a permanent of Seth's. But he's going to get 2 draws here. But if he whiffs for a couple turns, Seth could fight his way back into this game. Seth did a really good job of making sure that all the trading that was happening was 1-for-1. Brian drew more lands than he did, and despite getting ahead on cards, Seth has found a way to put himself in an advantageous position here.
And it's going to be 4 mana, that Blink of an Eye firing down at the end step, trying to draw in. What are some of the big win conditions for this deck? Because we're seeing a hyper-synergistic deck, but right now we're missing a lot of those pieces. We don't quite have the Adeliz, the Cinderwind, though that's part of it. We don't have the Naban. We don't really have the wide board. So is there anything that's really like the big game-changing creature that Brian Braun-Duin was able to find, or is this really a synergy deck?
Yeah, so he doesn't really have like some type of like large casting cost bomb. When you're playing these blue-red wizard decks, a lot of the time what you want to be doing is you want to be establishing a board presence and then using cards like Academy Journey Mage, Blink of an Eye, and Spot Removal to clear the way so that you can beat your opponent simply by using your mana more efficiently than they would.
So it's a Bloodstone Goblin that is going to find its way to the graveyard after the Eldest Reborn comes down to the battlefield, and Brian Braun-Duin struggling with establishing that board presence that you just talked about. He has not been able to really capitalize and get these attacks back in at Seth. He's going to discard this mountain here. He gets to draw a card off of that, the Rummage ability that you were referring to. He's about to have to discard one of these 2 cards.
Yeah, and if Brian discards a non-land here, he's probably going to be a little bit frustrated with himself for having played out the 8th one. 7, reasonable with a double Academy Drake deck, but
yeah, that's true. That is true. So we are going to take this one up. It's going to be the second Saga counter on it, which means that it's each opponent discards a card, and it's time to see what Brian Braun-Duin has got. Otherwise, it's a Drudge Sentinel up against a Keldon Raider as far as this battlefield goes. Not exactly how I expected it to go. And it's Aven Sentry. It's a pass back of the turn. We've got 1 blocker in the way of the Keldon Raider, the 3 mana available to make it indestructible. I think Seth's game plan might just be get in with the flyer.
Yeah, and the Eldest Reborn is a very powerful Magic card here. This is a card that dealt with a threat. Then it made Brian discard a card. Next turn, it's going to put the best creature on the battlefield onto the battlefield.
Yep. And we see a similar decision as last time. There are some Academy Journey Mages. There are those Cloud Reader Sphinxes. There is that Mace Unicorn, which you favored in the last game. And it's another Academy Drake, so we've got multiple of these. A 4-4 flyer on the battlefield, lining up pretty nicely against this Aven Sentry. We're going to get our third counter, and it's time to see what we like. And I think we're going to take a look at the graveyard this time. He was eyeing his own Mesa Unicorn. Might decide he likes a couple of other options more. That Academy Journey Mage, able to return one of these creatures to the hand. And this Cloud Reader Sphinx, able to really get a look at the top of his library, try and fix those draws, and also just be a substantial 3-4 on the battlefield, help develop that side of things.
Yeah, now he has a clean double block on this Academy Drake.
So that's going to go to the graveyard, and Seth is going to be diving into his first main phase. Working a little bit on a game plan. If he can find a way to answer this Academy Drake, looks a lot better because of the amount of pressure that he could potentially have in the air, but just currently unable to really break through that opposing 4-4.
Yeah, he does have 2 copies of Adamant Will in his deck, which would both be good enough to get past the Drake here. It seems like that's probably what he has. He's attacking into it here.
Attacking with the 3-5, notably not with both creatures, though.
Well, the other one has Summoning Sickness.
Oh, that's true, because
Yeah,
it did just come in at the end of the draw step, so the beginning of the first main phase. So it doesn't really, it's not the beginning of the turn. You do still have to wait your turn to be able to attack with it.
Yes.
That's true.
Yeah, it's an easy mistake to make. I've seen more than one person try to attack with their creature that came to play off the Eldest Reborn.
I'm used to playing hasty creatures, Jacob,
Yeah.
you know? I don't normally like to put them in the deck if they don't attack, do something the turn they come down. The Scries, I guess, were enough. I think I might see another Academy Journey Mage in this hand for Brian Braun-Duin. That's going to be the case. So that is going to...
great.
That just went back to his hand. It's his Cloud Reader Sphinx. Return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. And an Adeliz Cinderwind to follow it up. He just got himself a free creature out of that. Ooh.
Yeah, an Academy Journey Mage, when it is killing your opponent's 3-4 flyer as it enters the battlefield and adding a 3-4 flyer that's going to allow you to scry to your hand. I think this is one of the better Academy Journey Mages I've ever seen.
I've got to wonder if Brian Braun-Duin is going to maintain his mentality that the Journey Mage is overrated after this match, because every single time it's hit the battlefield, it's been phenomenal. We do see Serra Angel hit the battlefield. This is actually one of Seth's better cards.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great here in this spot.
It blocks really nicely against everything, really just offering a trade with the Academy Drake, but a 4-4 Flying Vigilance, if Seth is able to come up with really anything to supplement it at all, could be a huge boost. And of course, we're seeing one of the original versions of Serra Angel.
The Douglas Schuler art. It's very nostalgic.
Extremely. Extremely. What better way to celebrate 25 years of Magic than with Serra Angels? So, Drudge Sentinel, Serra Angel, Aven Sentry, kind of an unusual crew of cards. We're going to see a Dark Bargain come down, take a look at the top couple of cards. Look at 3 of them. Put 1 of them in the graveyard, 2 of them in your hand, lose 2 life. Hopefully he drew into something pretty spectacular. Because this Adeliz, the Cinderwind, Cloud Reader Sphinx, Academy Journey Mage, Academy Drake, this is definitely the kind of board that you were describing about what Brian was going to be attempting to assemble in this game. He was struggling a little bit early on, and then just a couple of massive turns, that Academy Journey Mage to get back. The Cloud Reader Sphinx also playing out the Adeliz, the Cinderwind. This is exactly where Brian wants to be.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage of the game, this is definitely where Brian wants to be. I actually don't think either of these games really played out the way that Brian intended. Brian, again, his deck is a tempo strategy. I think that usually Brian does not want to be trading creatures. Brian wants to be bouncing creatures to his opponent's hands to clear the way for big attack steps. And right now, he's gotten to this late stage of the game, and he is at an advantage, but he's already used both of his Journey Mages. As far as ways to clear that Serra Angel go, I think Fiery Intervention may be the only card left in his deck that actually cleanly kills the Angel. So things are interesting right now.
I wonder if some of those early blocks, some of those early trades were similar to what that mentality you said, which is that, Seth's going to win this. It's going to be by being really aggressive early on, or by getting lucky. And I wonder if Brian Braun-Duin came to the same conclusion about what Seth's game plan would be, and trying to put himself into the late game by blocking early and deciding that as the game goes forward, his card quality is going to continue to be higher. So making a couple of blocks that maybe weren't ideal early on to make sure that his life total stays high and he can survive to do that.
Yeah, and I could absolutely see myself doing the same thing.
So it's a Pegasus Courser. Also on the battlefield, Seth's got quite a few flyers right now and a Drudge Sentinel. That Sentinel on the battlefield, interestingly, I have not actually seen a Sentinel on the battlefield in my London games. I think maybe once. But otherwise, not a card that I've commonly seen.
Yeah, I've not seen many Drudge Sentinels out there in the wild.
So it's going to be the Guardian of Koilos that comes down to the battlefield. No historic cards that we wanted to bring back to our hand at the time. It's just going to be a 5-mana 4/4 hit in the battlefield. 5 creatures on one side of the battlefield. Brian Braun-Duin was sitting on a substantial 7 with multiple Cloud Reader Sphinx, the Adelies, the Cinderwind, Academy Journey Mage, Academy Drake, Keldon Raider, and the 1/3. That one's not going to be doing a whole lot as far as combat goes. It really kind of had its time in the sun in this match when it was cast in Weight of Memory on turn 4.
Yeah, which was great.
Looks good now. There's 2 removal spells that he doesn't need to play around.
Yeah, it's always pretty feel bad when your opponent hits like your best cards. Their mill thing.
Another land here from Brian Braun-Duin, and whatever he's sitting on in hand, he's been pretty patient with it. Both players, really. Seth has actually not done anything with his last turn either. So I think these players might be at sort of a stalemate thing here, really looking for something that's going to break this.
Yeah, and both players kind of just in a staring contest at this point. The board has gotten big and complicated. I think these types of situations are where the best players in the world really find their edge. But the fact that both of these players happen to be some of the best players in the world means that the crowded board, the complicated combat, this is not going to favor either of them as much as it might if one of them happened to be playing against somebody else who wasn't as well-versed in playing through these complicated board states.
Now, these board states do happen from time to time in Limited. What are some of the common things that you really see that actually break these? Because otherwise, it just kind of continues to build up a little bit on one side, a little bit on the other.
So one thing you can do is you can, look for the one good attack, the one creature you can attack with that will force your opponent to have to, trade down in order to make the play.
There's going to be Skizik on the battlefield. Brian continuing to apply this pressure, continuing to spread this board wide. This is his 8th creature. At what point do you just turn him sideways when the opponent's at 9?
I guess right now is Brian's answer to that question.
Keldon Raider and the Skizik at least getting in. This is actually the swing in for lethal, so blocks have to happen no matter what they are.
Yeah, and the reason he's attacking with these creatures is that neither of them just get eaten straight up by the Serra Angel. Neither of them just get eaten by the Drudge Sentinel. So he's forcing Seth to spend at least a card to deal with each of these attackers. And right now Seth has 5 creatures in the battlefield, whereas Brian has 8 creatures in the battlefield. So Seth has to spend 2 of his creatures to deal with these 2 attackers, and Seth is suddenly down to 3 creatures to Brian's 6, and that's a much more manageable board where Brian could, engineer something wherein he's at a massive advantage.
Sure. Another notable thing is that the Drudge Sentinel is not actually the best possible block on the Skizik. It does have trample.
Yeah.
So it is a 5/3. It is not going to die to it very well, and whatever happens, it's likely going to be getting some damage over into Seth's side of the battlefield. We did see them checking the libraries, by the way. I wonder if there's a consideration for these players of, if we're going to continue this board stall, can we get to a point in which whoever has fewer cards in library actually ends up with the disadvantage?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something both these players are worried about at this point. This game has gone on for some time at this point, and if the game does end via decking, Brian will lose. So
I mean, he had that weight of memory earlier. He also had the blink of an eye. So his
and an opt.
and the Keldon Raider.
Yep.
So he's been firing through quite a bit more of his library, which reflects itself on the battlefield with kind of his a bit more commanding presence at the moment.
Oh, actually, maybe the Dark Bargain splits it up. I think it's actually very close.
Oh, good point.
They may have
Okay.
the same library size right now.
Time to sideboard in your Gaia's Blessings.
I suppose so. Splash it. Splash it.
We're heading into the turn. We did see the Guardians of Koilos as well as the Pegasus take down the Skizik. We saw the Keldon Raider just get blocked by the Drudge Sentinel, which after 3 mana gets paid on Seth's battlefield. Not a whole lot of resolution on that side of things. Seth remains at 9 life right now. It's 9 on one side, 11 on the other. 4 creatures, though they're all fairly commanding flyers, and the Drudge Sentinel. And on the other side, really just more of the same. The flyers are kind of the topic right now.
Yeah, and Brian, once again, finding himself in a situation where he doesn't really have any great attacks.
Mm-hmm.
If he attacks with that Keldon Raider, he's just trading it for a Pegasus Courser.
Mm-hmm. Which probably doesn't feel the best, but at least it's another creature out of the air, maybe consideration. Otherwise, you just see Seth continue to throw the Drudge Sentinel in front of it all day.
Yeah. Seth could also do that if he wanted to.
Mm-hmm. There is the Gitu Journey Mage. This is going to deal 2 damage to Seth. Seth is going to find himself down to 7. Starting to really close into this. I wonder at what point the math lines up to where even with blocks on the highest creatures, you just barely start to squeak in with enough damage. I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, now if Seth just blocks the highest power creature all across the board here, if he blocks 4, 3, 3, 3, then he is. It looks like he's still taking lethal. The problem is that if he has anything, then Brian could, find himself a way to lose this game.
And while he's not losing the game right now, might as well keep waiting, keep being patient, wait until a position where you can absolutely take this game, especially because for Brian, if he wins, that's the end of the match.
Yeah. And at this point, the game has gone on for some time. It's if this game ends in Seth's favor, there's a high likelihood that this match ends in a draw.
Yeah, only 8 minutes left in this matchup at the moment. They started with 50. We're on game 2 right now, and game 1 was not particularly slow.
Game 1 ended pretty fast. This has been a very real game. Normally, when you see a bunch of Journey Mages and Adelises on the battlefield, it means that the game is going to end very fast.
There it is. This is the attack all out. Brian Brown-Duin has decided that now is his window. We've got 3 4s coming in. We've got 2 2s coming in. We've got 3 2s coming in. 4/4 Academy Drake, the Journey Mage, another one of these 3 2s. The Keldon Raider. The blocks at this point are going to be a difficult maze to maneuver for Seth.
Yeah, and I mean, here, if Seth puts the Drudge Sentinel in front of the Keldon Raider,
okay.
So I'm just going to talk through the most obvious blocks.
Sure.
If he puts the Serra Angel on a Cloud Reader Sphinx.
Okay.
If he puts the Aven Sentry on the Academy Drake, and I guess he would also have to jump with the other one. Then he's still dead, even if he just blocks the highest power among everything.
I think that's 9 damage. We're casting a Dark Bargain, looking for an answer.
Yeah.
Whew. Seth doing a little bit of the work for Brian.
Yeah, I mean, there are cards in the game of Magic that would keep him alive here and even allow him to win the game.
Let's see if he happens to find one of these. I'm not certain if he ever even ended up with one in his deck that can really get him out of this exact situation, because really the blocks are just not going to be lining up in his favor. Does have a couple of cards, though. He might be able to string together just a couple of cards. Nope, that's the handshake. Seth Manfield is going to fall to Brian Brown-Duin, one world champion to the other. 2015 and 2016. That is going to be a big win in 2, and he's going to be 7-0 heading into the next round. We're likely going to be keeping an eye on that one as we start to really develop who are the undefeated players at the end of this first day, because tomorrow's going to be another grind. There's going to be a lot more drafting, but starting the day off with not a single loss is definitely the way to go.
Brian, at the end of that game, revealed that his hand still contained a copy of Befuddle and a copy of Unwind. And what's very funny to me here is that Brian sideboarded both those cards in, and then they just sat in his hand for the whole game. He won it anyway.
Sideboarding is still relevant, though. I mean, he did have them as tools available to him, just didn't quite need them. But we are going to have more draft coming your way here in round 7 at the U.S. Nationals. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to round 7 here at U.S. Nationals in Columbus, Ohio. TJ Rogers joined by Jacob Van Lunen. Now we do have another feature match for you all. It is the Time Walk, and it's going to be featuring Wyatt Darby up against Piper Powell. Wyatt Darby, of course, the Pro Tour Dominaria champion, going 6-0 in that format, and we got to see him draft that really fantastic looking Slimefoot Obzon style deck. Tell me a little bit about Piper's deck.
So Piper has a black-white kind of mid-range deck here. Piper's mean power level of his deck is not very high, but Piper has a lot of action that could allow Piper to win games against more powerful cards. We see 2 copies of Calico Skin Witch here in Piper's deck. And
we're going to see her play the Sanctum Spirit here.
Yeah, and it's Sanctum Spirit there, another powerful card that I overvalued Sanctum Spirit when I first started drafting this format.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, this could potentially be a 3-power, unkillable creature with lifelink, but it doesn't often turn out that way.
Mm-hmm.
The activation is a lot harder to get by with that Sanctum Spirit.
And what we're seeing right now is Fungal Infection going in against this Sanctum Spirit. There are not, really forcing the opportunity to either have to discard a historic card, but Slimefoot on the battlefield. This is a huge card joining that Yavimaya Sapherd. We're going to get another Saproling and Juggernaut going to the graveyard right now to keep that one alive. It does mean that Piper is going to end up gaining 2 life out of this attack, as opposed to actually losing any life. Though, because the Saproling died, it means that there's actually going to be a 1 life drain because of this Slimefoot the Stowaway, which Eviscerate is going to very cleanly answer from Piper's side.
Yeah, and Piper absolutely needed to deal with that Slimefoot there.
Card's pretty good. We were about to have 4 mana available, a Slimefoot. Why even cast a card at that point?
Yeah, I completely agree.
Guardians of Koilos out on the battlefield. We just see the Yavimaya Sapherd get in and be aggressive. Piper just heading into her turn, 5 mana available. This Sanctum Spirit currently there, and is that I think that might be a Windgrace Acolyte as well as a Thallid Omnivore. So Thallid Omnivore hitting the battlefield. This is a card that you are a huge fan of.
Yeah, I think Thallid Omnivore is one of these cards that makes it really hard for your opponent to ever attack you on the ground if you have open mana, and it also makes it very hard for your opponent to ever block it simply because of the threat of activation. So Thallid Omnivore, while on its surface may seem like a 3/3 for 4 with an okay ability, the way it actually plays out is quite powerful.
We see a Feral Abomination come down to the battlefield. It's a card that always reminds me of back when I was in high school and learning about potential and kinetic energy. It's got so much of this potential energy to where you don't see it right away. But you never want to go to combat against it, because if it's good for them, it's going to be bigger.
Yes.
Windgrace Acolyte joining the battlefield. That does gain a little bit of life in addition to just putting a flyer onto the board.
And Piper here did not have her Calico Skin Witch, which is a really important card for her game plan against decks that have these more powerful top ends than hers, because she wants to get to a stage of the game where they're both kind of playing things out, and then Calico Skin Witch comes down, takes out the best cards in the opponent's hand, and then is able to just take the game over from there.
And we see Whisper Blood Liturgist coming down to the battlefield alongside these Saprolings. Now we've got a way to get back Slimefoot. Though, there it is, the Calico Skin Witch. It takes down a Krosan Druid and a Grow from the Ashes. There is a Slimefoot in the graveyard and a Whisper Blood Liturgist on the in the battlefield.
Yeah, and Wyatt going to be content to simply activate Whisper, get back Slimefoot, and then start activating Slimefoot. Wyatt's deck is very well positioned to, use this mana sink to its maximum efficiency. And Piper, Piper has a bit of an air force here with the Windgrace Acolyte, but it's going to be hard to race against Slimefoot triggers and, a 5/5 crashing in.
Yeah, and we're seeing this Feral Abomination attack in No Fear this time, and that Death Touch ability, we talked about it before, a little bit relevant now, actually, because no matter how big you make that Thallid Omnivore, it's going to fall to the Feral Abomination if you try and get in its way. And we're going to see a Soothsayer hit the battlefield as well. So a lot of Thallids, but not a whole lot of Saprolings. And on Wyatt's side of the battlefield, a whole lot of Saprolings, not a whole lot of Thallids.
Yeah. Now, interesting to note, the combo between Whisper and Slimefoot is backbreaking. It is so powerful here. Wyatt can pay 4 mana, create a Saproling, sacrifice 2 of those Saprolings, drain Piper for 2, return the sap herd back to the battlefield, get more saprolings,
Oh, wow.
and just create this chain where Wyatt is able to consistently drain Piper here. And
He would never need to cast another spell in the game, and he would have a game plan that is just monstrous without even having to attack. Wow.
no need to spend extra cards here.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, infinite chump blocks.
You'll always have them, and it even feels good to actually get those blocks in the way because you're going to end up gaining a little bit of life. Piper, she's down to 4 right now. There is not a whole lot of time for this game plan to actually come together. On Piper's side of the battlefield, there's this seal away, which is going to prevent the Whisper, so that is going to disable the combo at the time being. It just might be too late.
Yeah, at this point, Wyatt can get really aggressive at just, sending things in. The Slime Foot, those triggers are really dangerous. And while the lifelink is powerful on Piper's side of the table, it will...
Broken Bond to take out the seal away. The main deck inclusion, you talked a little bit about how you like the idea of the main deck inclusion of something like this, and we see that Broken Bond free the Whisper Blood Liturgist. Wasn't even that necessary there. And looks like we're actually going to be going to Game 3. We saw Piper tie it up, but for time considerations, we're going to dive into the critical match here. This is who's going to be facing off against Brian Braun-Duin, trying to become the undefeated player here of this draft pod, of this day. Piper getting hit by this divest early on. Wyatt also playing this. We saw Seth do the same thing.
Yeah, an interesting choice there from Wyatt. Perhaps a sideboard consideration.
Okay. We did end up losing that Thallid Omnivore, which is such a powerful card, and it's going to be a Cabal Evangel that hits the battlefield. It's just a 2/2 for 2, but it fills a nice spot on the curve. It does exactly what you need it to.
And now Wyatt here lacking non-black mana. Piper was lacking non-white mana.
Mm-hmm.
Just found her black source the previous turn. Now able to curve out 6 points of power on the table. Wyatt unable to cast spells here.
Yeah.
Piper looks to be taking over.
And now we're seeing sort of the punishment of this 3-color deck with the primary color being green. Nowhere near. Cannot grow from the ashes. This is just a situation which I think Piper's running away with this game.
Yeah, Piper's definitely winning this one. I believe Piper even has a Viscerate in hand to finish things off. So
a Drudge Sentinel is going to be part of the winning crew in this game. I couldn't be happier. We're at 3 life, but this board just looks monstrous. There's the handshake, and we're going to see Piper. She's going to be moving forward to play against Brian Braun-Duin, one of the best players in the world, a world champion. Piper's going to be coming on in and trying to hold the own against kind of a Dredge Sentinels, again, going to be facing off against this Wizards deck.
That's got to be an exciting place to be. You come to Nationals, and here you are, undefeated, going to the last round of day 1, and now you have to face off against a world champion.
It's got to be phenomenal.
Piper's got a pretty cool day.
But, of course, that's going to be for round 8. That is coming up next. We've got a couple of messages for you, and then come back and join us for more.